Hello and welcome to ILTV's Insider. I'm Aaron Porras, and our main topic tonight, sex. Because we all know that sex sells, but virtually no one knows the true costs. For one, a global pandemic and economic collapse giving rise to a sharp spike in the number of young women and teens entering the world of online sex work, and Israeli organizations among the many that are demanding action against what they see as a black hole for grooming, prostitutes, and sex trafficking. With me to discuss is spokesperson for the Israel Taskforce on Human Trafficking and Prostitution, Yahav Erez. And here in studio is Hadar Lav, sex offense investigator with the Child Online Protection Bureau, specialist in online sex abuse, and criminology doctoral student at Bar-Ilan University. Thank you both so much for joining. Now, let's start with the rise of OnlyFans and other platforms like OnlyFans and why that is seen as such a threat. Hadar, I'll start with you.
So, first of all, thank you for having me. And I believe that the main core, the hard core of the problem with OnlyFans is that most public is not aware of how dangerous and how exactly, what are the risks involved with getting in touch and getting sexually assaulted online. And what I want to say in the beginning, which I think is really the main thing in all of this discussion, is that there is no difference between being hurt online, sexually assaulted or sexually harassed, and between being assaulted in the physical sphere. It's devastating in the same way.
So, Yahav, I want to get your take on this as well, and maybe you can explain a little bit more theoretically about how young girls and women are basically groomed online and brought into this world that devolves often into physical, real-world sex work and trafficking.
So first of all, I'd like to make a few corrections. You opened by saying we're going to talk about sex. I want to say this is not about sex. This is about violence. Just like you can't call rape sex. It's actually a form of violence that manifests itself through sexual violence. Same way with prostitution, human trafficking, and the sex trade in general. It's about violence, it's not about sex. Same with the term sex work, which we don't use in Taskforce on Human Trafficking and Prostitution, because it is political and because it has motives behind it. And the motives are to normalize these platforms and the sex trade at large. And that's why we don't accept this term. So it's not sex and it's not work. It's actually sexual violence, just like any other sexual violence. And it's part of a spectrum. This spectrum is, some part of it is on the streets, part of it is in brothels, and part of it is online, like we're talking about today.
Well, do you see any, where do you draw the line between what you would consider legitimate sex work, if there is such a thing, and sexual violence and sexual acts under duress and this and the issues that you just explained?
So where I draw the line is a very good question, because the sex industry is a spectrum and a very, very wide one. Lots of people think there's this line in the sand that you can draw between human trafficking and sex work, and that's actually not the case on the ground. It's very important to mention that to us in the Taskforce on Human Trafficking and Prostitution, and anyone who is a sex trade abolitionist, there is no such thing as legitimate or consensual commodification of sexuality, because commodification of sexuality is inherently violent. Because it is inherently violent, it will have manifestations of other forms of violence once someone engages in it, either as a buyer or as a seller, because what's inherently violent will bring to it violence. And it's not about the conditions, and it's not about the different details, if it's online or offline. It is inherently violent. And that's why there is no line in the sand that we can look for to have a conversation about this, as long as it's commodification of sexuality, it is violent.
All right, Hadar, I want to come back to you. How, maybe you can get a little bit more into the process, how young girls and women are groomed through these online platforms?
Okay, so let me begin with the notion that the grooming process is the way for us to explain the difficulties in online environment, and where for us, for the let's call it the pre-social media generations, for those who didn't born for the social medias, sometimes it's hard for us to understand why and what makes people continue relations or staying in environment that is bad for them. I think that grooming explains it in the best simple way, and the short version is that offenders manipulate victims into a relationship that they're actually buying their trust, their victims' trust, and that way they can make them cooperate and just lead them to do whatever they want them to do. So grooming, if we're talking about OnlyFans, the first couple of stages of grooming is that the offenders create an environment that will make the victim feel good. They can make them feel good about their body, they can feel empowered, and basically they're making them feel that, like they want to keep going, keep this relationship further and further. And when I'm comparing grooming in its basic form to OnlyFans, we can understand that OnlyFans as a platform, the way it's been published, the way people are talking about it, as if it's a naive and a good and a liberal sort of platform. This is the first part of the first stage of the grooming. It makes the society look at it as it's good, as this is what can make me feel better about my body image and whatever. And once, let's say, a woman decided to upload her photos into this platform, she begins to collect compliments and collect followers, and that makes her feel good. That right. Improves her self-esteem. And then on the next stage, they make them. It's getting harder and harder for these women to set boundaries, to draw the line between what they feel comfortable in doing and what they're not.
So, Yahav, again, you mentioned that pretty much all of this, everything associated with OnlyFans and similar platforms, you would consider to be on the violent spectrum, on the spectrum of sexual violence and sexual assault that is not congruent with any sort of legitimate porn industry. So, there are those, however, who say that, as Hadar just alluded to, that it's a sexual liberation, that they're taking control over their sexuality. There's a push for so-called ethical porn. What do you say to the minor group of people, particularly women, who say that they are totally informed and they know what they're getting into?
So I wouldn't say anything to them because we speak to the public, and the public, in many ways, is a very low-hanging fruit in the sense that they are just waiting for someone to say that they are liberated and that they want it and that it's their free choice. And even if there are thousands and tens of thousands of people who are being hurt by these platforms and by the sex industry as a whole, it's enough for one person or very few people to come and say, this is liberating for us. We are profiting off of this. This is good for us. For the public to just accept that and accept the whole phenomenon as acceptable and normalized and legitimate. And that's exactly the problem. Together with the very ancient tradition of shaming women in this industry, instead of asking the questions about who's making the real profit here, because this is an industry that makes billions of dollars off of mostly young girls who are not aware enough, who are not old enough to actually make these decisions and to be aware of, the consequences. And instead of asking questions about the people who are sitting behind these platforms and profiting off of them, we're busy shaming the women who are making money off of these platforms. And the shame needs to be on the people who are standing behind these platforms, and the people who are the fans, the so-called fans, who are paying money to basically see homemade porn videos of young girls doing horrible things to themselves that they are custom ordered from their fans, from their so-called fans. And I think that we should take our gaze and move it from the women that are claiming whatever they're claiming, whether they're claiming that it's hurting them or whether they're claiming that it's benefiting them. And we should talk about the responsibility, the social responsibility, and look at this problem from a macro point of view.
All right, so listen, you kind of also alluded to this as well, that prostitution is said to be one of the oldest professions in existence. It's a common trope, and it doesn't seem to be going away, especially with the advancement of technology, the internet, new platforms like this. What do you suggest be done? What action are you advocating? Is it to minimize the industry in an effort to eradicate prostitution, or is it to better regulate?
So first of all, as an abolitionist, obviously we're talking about eradicating and not about, minimalizing harm, though there are aid organizations here in this country and around the world who do harm reduction, which is very, very important and vital to the lives of the people in this industry, but it's not enough, because no matter how much aid and harm reduction you can provide for people in this industry, the problem with grooming, and as Hadal mentioned, you're always getting new blood, new and very young blood into the industry, and all you're doing is getting new people who are going to get hurt and are going to need aid and harm reduction. So that's why the abolition stance says we need to eradicate this. And I want to also correct, it's not the oldest profession in the world, it's the oldest oppression in the world.
All right, now, as technology gets more and more advanced, as I mentioned, porn, human trafficking, and sexual abuse are advancing with it. We saw this, as I mentioned, with the internet, with platforms like OnlyFans. How is virtual reality factored into this new, into this expanding but old issue, I should say? Hadal, what are the risks associated with this new medium?
So just as it is dangerous to be just walking around the internet without knowing the consequences and the dangerous, I'm talking about specifically at minors, but not necessarily. It is dangerously at the same way to playing games through VR techniques, because, well, everything can happen, and we have been known that there are publications all over the world about women who entered the VR atmosphere and got assaulted and got offended by just after a few minutes of beginning the games. And we need to understand that in the virtual reality, getting hurt feels even more devastating than it is via chat or just texting, because they can actually feel in more of they can receive in more of their senses the situation. They can hear it, they can hear the offender right nearby them, they can feel whatever it is, they can feel it shaking when someone is touching them. So it's more real as it's supposed to be, and it's very common. And I think as I said in the beginning, the awareness, especially in the society, this is our way of resolving this problem. We need to be aware of it. We need to understand that this is a difficult situation.
Yahav, similar question to you. How do we address these expanding, evolving issues in a way that is most beneficial to the victims in question. For example, if we know that prostitutes are basically sex slaves, and that's due to a number of issues, according to statistics, typically lack of education or some sort of financial issue, why not provide a clemency for criminal charges? Why not provide financial and debt deferment programs? Why not basic courses and drug rehabilitation, things like that? There seem to be very concrete things that government, at the very least, can do societally to address this issue, but we don't, or at least we don't hear about it very often if it exists.
Yes, so it's definitely important. All the things you mentioned and more are things that we're working on and have been working on even more intensively since the bill that makes it illegal to buy sex in Israel. And on that, on that basis, we are demanding from different government offices and different officials and decision makers to comply with this decision to make sex buyers, the criminals, and women and people in prostitution people who deserve aid and rehabilitation. And these are exactly the things that we're working on, but none of that and law enforcement and aid are not enough. And education and advocacy are as important, because all of the things that you mentioned, if it's, animated porn, if it's VR porn, if it's, AI sex dolls, those are all patchwork. Everything is patchwork other than sex education and real quality sex education from a young age to teach people that sexuality cannot and should not be commodified. And that is part of, sex education that makes people, have a real sense of agency. Sexual agency is spoken about in sex education organizations that work on that with youth here in this country. And if you want young people and teenagers to learn about how sexual engagements need to look like and should look like in a healthy way, then prostitution and human trafficking and the sex trade at large need to be spoken about in sex ed, classes, and anyone who's engaged in sexual education needs to talk about this, needs to talk about the sex industry, and that's the only way to make the suffering stop.
So, as Yahav just mentioned, the most recent legal framework in Israel is called the Nordic model, and it makes paying for sexual services a civil offense with fines, and then paying for sex with minors a felony. Hadav, has this had the desired effect? Why is it that you can still go to South Tel Aviv and see whole streets of door-to-door brothels?
Let me just begin with saying that I'm no longer in the police force. But from what I know, I think it's more of a decision, it's a large decision of the chief commander of the police, and wherever he decides to put his man or woman at the job, this is what happens, and it's all a matter of decisions from above.
I mean, what are the reasons? I mean, were you ever given any sort of reasons during your time in the police force?
We were tasked to find help situations with online prostitutions for male, for the gay community, because it's a widely spread phenomenon in the community. And this is exactly what we did back when I was an investigator. And if I can add just another little thing about my experience as an investigator, I once collected a testimony from a young 21 years old woman, and she was very intelligent and spoke really nice about her life. And she told me that she was taking nude artistic pictures of herself and uploading them to OnlyFans. This is where I was first introduced with this platform. And during all this conversation, all I felt was I need to protect her. And on the other hand, I was listening to her words, and she actually almost managed to convince me that she's doing it out of her free will. In the end of her testimony, she told me that before she joined the OnlyFans, before she began all of that, she was raped by her good male friend. And she's looking at the OnlyFans as an opportunity for her, as a therapeutic way of dealing. And I think, as I may not be the judge of it because I'm not really, no one can tell what is in her future, if it really helps her or no. But I think it's important to know that for most women, children, or whoever, it's not necessarily, or it's a really risky, dangerous, slippery slope.
Yahav, do you have any final comments? And again, do you think that the Nordic model has had anywhere near the effect that it was intended to have?
So I totally agree with Hadar about everything she said right now. Many times we listen to people talk about their experiences, and it's very easy for us to really want to hear that everything is okay, so that we can go to sleep at night, without worrying that actually the world is filled with very, very, horrid human rights violations to that degree. But I think that the Nordic model, one of its biggest successes, and time will tell. It's very early to tell about the success of the model and of the law. But I think that what we're seeing is less and less legitimacy for the sex industry, at least in its physical form. The problem is that now, especially after COVID-19, we're seeing more and more of the digital form come into our lives and, try and explain itself as something different, as not sex industry, as not prostitution. And it definitely is. It just looks a little differently, but it's just as much prostitution and just as much sex trade as anything else.
All right. I want to thank you again so much for joining us today. This has been an enlightening conversation. Hadar Lahav and Yahav Erez, thank you both so much for joining us. And of course, everybody at home, thank you for watching. I'm Aaron Porras. This was ILTV's Insider. Please tune in next time for more on everything Israel. And let us know in the comments online if there's a topic that you'd like us to cover next. And finally, for more of the latest updates from Israel, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at ILTV.tv and sign up for our streaming platform, ILTV+. Thank you so much. Be well, and we'll see you soon.